Have you ever just had that feeling that there are these huge, unseen forces kind of shaping your world? You know, that big decisions about our economy are being made in rooms you and I will never get to see? Well, turns out you're not wrong. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the invisible hands that are quietly guiding, well, pretty much everything. So let's just start with a number. $10.6 trillion. To really wrap your head around that, that is more than the entire economies of Germany, the UK, and France, all put together. And all of that is managed by just one company.
And here's the real kicker. They're not alone. The company we're talking about, BlackRock, is just one of three massive firms that all operate in almost the exact same way. Together, they're known as the Big Three.
So, this is the big question, right? How does a company with that much money actually affect your life? How do these financial giants end up influencing the price of your groceries, the security of your job, or even the safety of your family? That's what we're going to unpack.
All right, so to understand how all this works, first we need to meet the players. We're basically talking about two main types of companies here, these giant asset managers and these elite consulting firms. They're the main characters in our story.
That's actually how one person described BlackRock. It, along with its two big peers, Vanguard and State Street, are what we call asset managers. And they are so enormous and so interconnected that they own a big piece of almost every major company you can think of.
And their reach is just staggering. Seriously, we're talking about having influence over 95% of the Fortune 500. They get hired as advisors by the US government, by the Fed, by governments all over the world. Then you add in the elite consultants like McKinsey, who advise those same corporations and governments, and what you get is a very small group of firms with their fingerprints on nearly every powerful institution out there.
Okay, so how do they actually do it? What's the secret sauce? What's the playbook? Let's break down the key moves that give these companies so much power.
So first off, what even is an asset manager? Well, it's actually pretty simple. They take other people's money and they invest it. But here's the most important part. A huge chunk of that money is our money. It's in our retirement plans, our 401ks, or pensions, but we don't get any say in how they use it.
Now, their number one product is something called an index fund. Think of the stock market like a big horse race. Instead of trying to be a genius and pick the one horse that's going to win, an index fund just puts a little bet on every single horse in the race. It's a way to invest in the whole market, which means these firms end up owning a little piece of, well, basically everything.
And now for their favorite play, the stock buyback. It's kind of like a corporate magic trick. A company takes its profits and instead of, raising wages or inventing a new product, it just buys its own stock. This makes fewer shares available, which, poof, artificially juices the price of the ones that are left. For decades, this was actually illegal. It was considered market manipulation, but that all changed back in the 80s.
And that one change really kicked off a total revolution in how companies thought about themselves. Back in the 60s, a company's profits would go back into the business, into its workers, and its shareholders. But today, the game is really just one goal: maximize shareholder value at any cost. And the main way to do that is through stock buybacks, which, by the way, make executives a lot richer, since their pay is now tied directly to that stock price.
Okay, so that's the playbook. But what does it actually look like in the real world? For real people? Let's connect the dots and see the actual human consequences of this high-stakes money game.
Let's take Lowe's Home Improvement. The average worker there makes about $33,000 a year. In 2023, the CEO made 557 times that much. And during that same time, the company spent billions of dollars on stock buybacks while workers were reporting that their stores were so understaffed they could barely function.
And that's not just a statistic, That's a real person's life. This is what a former Lowe's employee, Felix Allen, had to say about it. When billions are getting funneled into these buybacks, there's just less money left over for the actual people creating the value, people who might have given decades of their lives to that company. And sometimes, this obsession with cutting costs can have truly tragic consequences. Back in the 90s, the consulting firm McKinsey advised Disneyland to slash its maintenance staff. The mechanics warned them this was incredibly dangerous. One of them said the reason they don't fail is because we check them every night. But the cuts went through. And what followed was a series of horrible, preventable accidents, all of them linked right back to those failures in maintenance and staffing.
And now, this same playbook is coming for the things we literally cannot live without. BlackRock is making a huge push to buy up essential infrastructure. We're talking about the companies that provide your electricity, your water. Why? Well,
They see a captive audience, right? A customer base that has nowhere else to go. For them, it's a guaranteed way to make money.
So when you zoom out and look at all these different pieces, you start to realize these aren't just a bunch of isolated incidents. Nope. They are all part of a self-feeding loop. It's a system that is perfectly designed to benefit a very, very small number of people.
Here's how that loop works. Step 1. The big three asset managers own so much stock they have huge voting power in a company. Step 2. They almost always vote for whatever the company's management wants. Step 3. Management, whose pay is tied to the stock, uses company profits for stock buybacks. Step 4. The stock price goes up, making executives and the biggest shareholders richer. And Step 5. That money is siphoned away from the workers, whose wages just go flat.
And here is where it gets truly, truly wild. The whole thing is circular. I mean, who are the biggest shareholders in BlackRock? Yep, Vanguard and State Street. And who are the biggest owners of Vanguard? You guessed it, BlackRock and State Street. It's a completely closed system. The financial sector basically owns itself, creating this loop that sucks money in and almost never spits it back out to the rest of the economy.
So how does a system like this protect itself? Well, through what's called the revolving door with the government. High-ranking government officials leave their jobs and go work for places like BlackRock. In return, BlackRock lobbies hard and successfully to avoid the kind of government oversight that other big financial firms have to deal with. And then you have McKinsey, working for both the corporations and the very government agencies that are supposed to be regulating them. It creates these massive conflicts of interest.
So all of this really brings us to the most fundamental question of all. When you see how all these pieces fit together, you just have to ask, who is our economy actually for?
Right? We're often told that what's good for Wall Street is good for Main Street because so many of us have retirement accounts in the stock market. But is that really true? Who actually owns a meaningful slice of the pie?
Well, this chart answers that question pretty loud and clear. The wealthiest 1% of Americans own half of all corporate stocks. The top 10% combined, they own 86%, which means the vast majority of the country, the bottom 90% of us, we own just 14%. So this idea that we're all shareholders in any real way, it's pretty much a myth.
Look, the system we have today, with all its weird loops and loopholes, it didn't happen by accident. It was designed this way. And understanding that design, that's the first step. Which leaves us with the biggest question of all. If we were going to rebuild it, who should we be rebuilding it for?